I promise to do give the recipe for the bread that I normally make. And so these are the ingredients. I always make my bread with whole wheat flour. I also use baker's flour, oil, butter, sugar, and of course water. Okay, so I don't normally measure, but for the purpose of giving the recipe, I'm going to do that today. So I'll put 2 cups. This is a 8-ounce cup. I'll put 2 cups, 3 cups of baker's flour. And then I'll add 1.5 cups of whole wheat flour. Then I'll use 6 ounces of sugar. I think 4 ounces will do. Yes, and about 8 ounces of butter. This is the 16-ounce pack of anchor butter that I tend to use. And I'll cut it in half. Or there's also an 8-ounce pack that you can use. The thing with the butter is that the more you use, then the softer is the bread and the longer it lasts. However, if you're thinking about calories, then what you will do is cut down on the amount of fat that you use. But of course, it won't necessarily last as long. Then, of course, it's a very important yeast. Use 1 pack of yeast, which is 11 grams. It's a dry yeast. And for this amount of flour, I use the entire pack. So, next thing I do is to mix it all up. Sometimes I melt the butter beforehand. Otherwise, if not, I just cut it in to the flour, almost like if you're doing pastry. And it's a method where you work the butter into the flour until it gets fine and disappears. So, if the water is warm, it's better. But I haven't measured this water yet, so let me see how much water I will need. I have 1 cup, 1/8-ounce cup of water. And as you can see, it still needs more water because it's dry. And so I'm going to use another 8-ounce cup of water. And I'm trying to make sure that I get all of the dry flour wet. Now the important thing about this is consistency, and sometimes it's very hard to decide what's the right consistency. So my trick has been to take it to a soft consistency and then bring it back to the right consistency that I need. This is another 4 ounces of water. So far we've used 2.5 cups of water, and bringing the flour in. Notice it's sticky, very sticky. And I'm trying to get all of the flour, the dry flour that's in the pan. Now, to unstick my hands, I use oil. This is where the oil comes in, and the oil helps me to keep the dough soft whilst at the same time it's not sticky. So take a handful of oil. And there is some effect of the oil on the flour, and it helps to clean out your hands, and it allows you to handle the dough better. So this is where you're now bringing it together to knead it. And we're almost done. When you knead it with the oil, it's going to have a very soft consistency. See? And this is not the consistency that you necessarily want. So there is where you use a little flour. Now I'm going to do about a handful of flour in the first instance. And you sprinkle it over the dough, and you knead it in. At this point, the dough shouldn't be sticky anymore. Allows you to work the flour in, and you're aiming for a smooth round ball. And you always clean out the side of your bowl to make sure you're working all of the flour. When the flour works in, it's still not smooth and it's getting a bit sticky, you add a little more flour. This is where experience helps. Another handful. And you're aiming for that smooth round ball, and the kneading is a kind of folding from the end into the middle using the heel of your palm. And you're trying to work it into the same middle until it becomes a ball. And it is said that the more you knead the flour, the better the bread. Okay. A smaller handful because it's getting to where I want it to go. So a smaller handful, and I continue. It allows my hand not to stick in the flour. And there you have it, a ball of dough. At this point, you leave the dough to rise for 45 minutes to 1 hour. So you cover it down and you leave it to rise for 1 hour. Okay, so the dough has risen. I have my pan which I'm going to grease. I have just a bit of butter, and I grease the pan so that the dough doesn't stick to it when it's baking. And And I have the flour to roll the dough out into loaves. My knife, and I cut pieces of the dough. Just take it, cut one, try to cut them into even pieces. Two. One of the reasons for cutting them into even pieces is that when they're all more or less the same size, then they'll all bake at around the same time. If you have a very small piece of dough, then it'll bake faster than the others and then maybe burn. So, I have my 3 pieces. I'm going to make 3 loaves of bread. And what I do is I flour the board, right? That's to make sure that the dough doesn't stick to it. Then I make them into biggish balls, because this is what allows me to now roll it out into a dough, loaf shape kind of bread. So this is one, and then I put it in the pan. Then I do the second one. See, this is the consistency of it. It's soft, not stiff. And I make them into a little ball like this, which allows me to roll it lengthways into a dough. You can make your bread any shape you want. It can be round. Takes a little bit of managing sometimes to get it shaped nicely and smooth. And then this is the last one. Alright, so I have a little round dough again, and then I lengthen it up. And I do this, see, I have a loaf shaped bread. You can put it into a loaf pan. In this case, I'm putting it into this pan. So I have 3 loaves of bread, and I cover it for 15 minutes. And I put on the oven at 350 degrees, and that will heat up for 15 minutes. It's important that the oven is hot before you put the bread in, so that 15 minutes at 350 degrees is just about a good enough time for it to reach the required temperature, and then you put your bread in. In the meantime, these 3 loaves will raise again in the 15 minutes. And then you bake for 35 to 40 minutes. So here's the bread, all baked. Took about 35 to 40 minutes. And it's done.